The incident. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden hue over the streets of downtown. The air was thick with the heat of early summer, but for Officer Richard Shaw, the temperature was the least of his worries. He had just finished his shift, tired and irritable, when his radio crackled with a call to pull over a car for a minor traffic violation, an illegal U-turn at the corner of 5th and Elm. It was routine, almost boring. He hadn't realized yet that this stop would change everything. He made a sharp left turn onto Elm Street, eyes scanning for the offending vehicle. A few seconds later, he saw it. An older black sedan with a dented bumper and dark-tinted windows. Shaw's grip tightened on the steering wheel as he flipped on his sirens and pulled the car to a stop. His hand instinctively went to his sidearm, even though he knew there was no real threat. He always felt the need to assert dominance from the start. It wasn't just about enforcing the law. It was about making sure people knew who was in charge. The driver, a black man, stepped out of the car before Shaw had a chance to reach him. Shaw's eyes narrowed in disbelief. He could already feel the wave of annoyance building. "Stay in the car!" he barked, his voice thick with authority. The man didn't flinch, but Shaw could see the tension in his posture. He slowly lowered his hands and stepped back toward his vehicle. The officer's gaze hardened. "Just my luck," Shaw muttered under his breath. Another black man thinking he was above the law, he thought. His prejudices flared without hesitation. Shaw got out of his cruiser and slammed the door with more force than necessary. The man hadn't returned to his car as ordered, and Shaw was in no mood to play games. As he approached, his eyes quickly scanned the man from head to toe. Tall, fit, late 30s or early 40s. He wore a dark jacket, a black baseball cap pulled low over his brow, and a cool, unbothered expression. The moment Shaw saw his face, something unfamiliar prickled in his chest. The man didn't look like the usual suspects Shaw dealt with on the streets, but it didn't matter. Shaw was used to the world seeing him as a protector, a figure of unquestionable power. He didn't let anyone challenge that. "Do you have any idea why I stopped you?" Shaw asked, his tone clipped and impatient. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood there, his posture still and steady. "I was making a U-turn." "I know," he finally said, his voice calm but firm. There was no hint of fear in it, only a quiet defiance that Shaw didn't like. Shaw's fingers twitched, and for a second, he felt the temptation to escalate. "You know it's illegal to make that kind of turn without signaling, right?" "Yes, officer, I know the law," the man responded. Shaw stepped closer, narrowing his eyes. He didn't like the way the man was standing there, looking him in the eye like he wasn't just some random person on the street. He was making Shaw feel small, in a way that made him feel out of control. The fact that the man wasn't intimidated irked him more than anything. "What's your name?" Shaw asked, his voice suddenly laced with a condescending edge. "Marcus Thompson," the man replied, still unflinching. Shaw raised an eyebrow, the name not ringing a bell. "I'll need you to provide your ID, Mr. Thompson," Shaw said, his hand already reaching for his handcuffs. He wasn't in the mood for a lecture on traffic laws. The man's calmness was only making Shaw more irritated. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a leather wallet. His movements were deliberate and slow, almost like he was trying to prove a point. As he handed over his ID, Shaw's eyes flicked down to it. He froze. The name on the ID said Marcus Thompson, but that wasn't what stopped Shaw. The title underneath the name, Police Chief, City of Crestview, made his blood run cold. Shaw's breath hitched in his chest, his hand faltering mid-air as he looked up at the man before him. For a moment, everything around him seemed to blur. This man, this black man, standing here, unaffected by Shaw's authority, was the new police chief? How was that even possible? Marcus stood tall, his face calm but unwavering, as if he were completely aware of the confusion rolling through Shaw's mind. He'd seen it before. The shock, the disbelief, the discomfort people felt when they realized who he was. But for Shaw, there was something different. There was something in Marcus's eyes that conveyed not just authority, but a deep, steady understanding of power. A power that Shaw had never been able to grasp. For a long moment, Shaw didn't know what to do. His mind raced. He had been prepared for this to be just another routine stop. But now he was standing in front of a man who outranked him, someone who, only moments ago, had been just another citizen. But now, Marcus wasn't just any citizen. He was the head of the very institution Shaw worked for, and the realization was almost too much to process. Marcus didn't give Shaw a chance to recover from his shock. "I'll just be on my way now, officer," he said, his voice still calm, but there was an undeniable edge to it. "I'd appreciate it if you didn't make a bigger scene than necessary." Shaw opened his mouth to respond, but the words didn't come. He could feel the heat rising in his chest, the humiliation slowly sinking in. What had just happened? He wasn't sure whether it was the embarrassment of realizing the man in front of him was his new superior, or whether it was the absolute powerlessness he felt in that moment. Maybe it was both. He stepped back, his face flushed with something between anger and shame. "You're free to go, Mr. Thompson," he muttered, his voice tight. Marcus didn't respond. He simply turned and walked back to his car. The sound of his footsteps a staccato rhythm on the pavement, each one reminding Shaw of the new world he would have to navigate. Shaw stood there for a moment, his mind racing as the implications of the encounter began to settle in. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He had just humiliated himself in front of the new police chief, though, at that moment, he still couldn't quite wrap his head around what that meant. But one thing was certain. His life would never be the same. The fallout. The news spread faster than wildfire, igniting controversy and debate throughout Crestview. By noon, local news outlets had picked up the story, and by early evening, the city was abuzz with discussions on street corners, in living rooms, and across social media platforms. The headline that caught everyone's eye was, "White Officer Spits on Black Man, Later Revealed as New Police Chief." A headline that would become a point of tension and divisiveness for days to come. The story had layers. A white officer, Richard Shaw, who had long been known for his rough handling of minorities, had been caught on camera in the most demeaning act possible, spitting on a black man. That alone was enough to spark outrage. But when it was revealed that the black man in question was none other than Marcus Thompson, the newly appointed police chief, the complexity of the incident became clear. The outrage was immediate. At the heart of it was the blatant disrespect Shaw had shown Marcus, an officer he had likely never imagined would be his superior. It was easy to dismiss a regular black man on the street, but a black man wearing the title of police chief? That was a different story altogether. For Marcus, the news was both a relief and a burden. On one hand, the truth was finally out there. He was the new face of change. He was the embodiment of progress and reform. On the other hand, the incident brought unwanted attention, complicating the journey he had only just begun. He had always known that stepping into the role of police chief in a historically white-dominated department would come with obstacles. But this was a full-blown mess. Inside the station, the tension was palpable. The shift in dynamics was undeniable. It was as if a bomb had exploded, and no one knew exactly how to begin picking up the pieces. Captain Elaine Carter, Marcus's right-hand ally in his journey to reform the force, had spent the afternoon fielding calls from the mayor's office, trying to calm the public backlash. The press conference had been a double-edged sword. While Marcus's appointment had been hailed as a triumph for equality and reform, the incident with Shaw undermined everything. The department now looked like a place where racism wasn't just tolerated, it was institutionalized. "Have you spoken to Shaw?" Marcus asked, his voice calm but with a hint of frustration. He stood in his office, staring out the window at the city skyline. Captain Carter, a woman in her mid-40s with salt and pepper hair, sighed and set down the phone. She had an air of quiet authority, the kind of person who could handle chaos without breaking a sweat. But today, even she seemed shaken. "I've spoken to him. He's been suspended while they investigate the incident. But this isn't going to go away anytime soon, Marcus. People are angry, and rightfully so. The public is demanding accountability. They're demanding you do something." Marcus ran his hand over his face, rubbing his temples. The weight of what he had inherited as chief felt heavier than ever. He had been thrust into this position of leadership not just because of his skills or experience, but because of the promise of reform. He had worked so hard to build trust within his community and the department. Yet here he was, dealing with an officer's racial prejudice being exposed at the worst possible time. "I didn't ask for this," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "I didn't ask for Shaw to go rogue like that." "I know," Captain Carter replied softly. "But you are the chief now. You don't have the luxury of ignoring this. Shaw's behavior, especially in the wake of everything you represent, it's not just an individual issue. It's a symptom of a much bigger problem, one that's been festering in this department for years. The press will keep pushing. The city will demand answers." Marcus nodded grimly. He'd been expecting this. He wasn't naive enough to think that he could change things overnight, or even that it would be easy. But this felt like a slap in the face, not just to him, but to the people who had supported his rise. They had believed in him. That evening, the mayor held a press conference. The tension was thick in the air, with reporters crowding around, shouting questions as the mayor took the podium. She was a young woman, eager and determined, but she could feel the weight of the situation too. "The city of Crestview demands accountability," the mayor said firmly, glancing at the reporters. "This incident is a reflection of the systemic issues that have plagued our police force for years. We will not tolerate racial discrimination or violence in our police department. Officer Shaw has been suspended pending an investigation, and the city will take every measure to ensure that justice is served." Marcus sat at the back of the room, his face neutral but his heart racing. This was what he had feared: the scrutiny, the pressure. The mayor continued to speak, framing Shaw as a rogue element that didn't represent the department. "We are committed to moving forward," the mayor declared. "Marcus Thompson is the new chief, and we trust him to lead the department with integrity, transparency, and accountability." The next morning, Marcus arrived at the police station early, hoping to start his day with a clear mind. He had a lot to do, decisions to make, officers to meet with. But as he walked through the lobby, the murmurs from the staff were impossible to ignore. "Did you hear? Chief Thompson's a black man, and Shaw spat on him. Can you believe that? Unbelievable. And now he's got to clean up Shaw's mess." The whispers were unavoidable. His officers, some of whom had worked with him before, looked at him with a mix of respect, confusion, and, for some, outright resentment. Marcus understood it. He wasn't naive. He wasn't just a black man in charge. He was a black man in charge in a department that hadn't had one in generations. He walked into his office, his mind still spinning. There was a meeting scheduled with the department's leadership team in an hour. He needed to prepare. But first, he pulled out his phone and glanced at the notifications. More messages from his community, from his old colleagues, from allies. They all spoke of the same thing: support, solidarity, and the belief that this moment could be one of real change. But for Marcus, the reality was more complicated. He knew he was walking into a storm. Shaw's actions, though unforgivable, were just the surface of the deeper issues within the department. He wasn't just going to have to prove himself to the public. He was going to have to prove himself to the officers who still viewed him as one of them at best, and an outsider at worst. As the meeting began, Marcus took a deep breath and addressed his team. His voice was steady, but there was an undeniable edge to it. Shaw's behavior was unacceptable. It reflects the kind of toxic mindset that cannot be allowed in this department. I will not tolerate racism or abuse of power. As of today, we are beginning an internal investigation. I want all officers to be aware that there will be zero tolerance for any form of misconduct. That includes you, and that includes me. His words hung in the room. The officers exchanged glances. For a moment, Marcus wondered if anyone believed him. Then, one officer spoke up. "You're going to have to do a lot more than talk, Chief. This department has been broken for a long time." Marcus didn't flinch. "And I intend to fix it." The announcement. The next few days passed in a blur of press conferences, public appearances, and frantic meetings with the city council. Marcus's life, already a whirlwind with the pressures of his new position, had shifted into overdrive. The incident with Officer Shaw had made waves far beyond Crestview. The media, both local and national, were hungry for answers, and the questions came faster than Marcus could process them. The pressure was mounting on all sides. That afternoon, the mayor called him into her office. Mayor Diana Powell, a seasoned politician with sharp features and a keen sense of pragmatism, was sitting behind her desk when Marcus arrived. The room was tastefully decorated, sleek, modern furniture, a few framed photographs of the city, but there was little warmth to it. It was a room made for power, not comfort. "Marcus," the mayor said, her tone cool but not unfriendly, "we need to address the fallout from the Shaw incident. Public opinion is divided, and we have to make sure that the community knows the city is fully behind you." Marcus nodded. He'd known this moment was coming, but hearing it from the mayor made it feel all the more real. She had been one of the key figures in supporting his promotion to police chief, and now she was relying on him to deliver. The weight of that expectation settled over him like a heavy cloak. "I understand," Marcus replied. He had always been good at compartmentalizing, at keeping his emotions in check, but the mayor's words reminded him of the broader implications of his position. He wasn't just representing himself now, he was representing an entire community that had waited for this moment, for change, for reform, for someone who looked like them to be in charge. "Good," the mayor said, leaning forward slightly. "I've been talking to the press, and they're pushing for more transparency. They want to know how you plan to address the issues with Shaw, with the department, and with the city. People are expecting quick answers, and I know that's not always possible, but we need to show them that we're moving forward." "I'm working on it," Marcus said. His mind was already racing, thinking of the steps he would need to take to begin the difficult process of reform. But it's not just Shaw. There are larger problems within the department, problems that have been building for years. This isn't going to be a quick fix. "I know," the mayor replied, her voice softening. "But you have to start somewhere. And that starts with a clear message to the public. We can't afford to look weak now." Marcus swallowed, the weight of her words pressing on him. He had never been one to shy away from a challenge, but this was different. The eyes of the entire city were upon him now. His every move, every decision would be scrutinized, and the smallest mistake could undo everything he had worked for. The following morning, Marcus sat in his office at the Crestview Police Department, preparing for what was likely going to be one of the most significant moments of his career: the press conference. The room was quiet as he glanced over his notes, the speech carefully crafted to both calm the public's fears and inspire hope. He had to strike the right balance, acknowledge the mistake, but also emphasize the need for a new direction, for a department that could heal, rebuild, and serve the community with integrity. As he reviewed the points one last time, Captain Elaine Carter entered the room. She stood in the doorway for a moment, her presence commanding, but friendly. "You ready for this?" she asked, her voice light but with an undertone of seriousness. Marcus looked up at her, offering a thin smile. "I'll be ready. There's no other choice." Elaine crossed the room and sat down in one of the chairs across from him. "I know it's not easy," she said. "But you're the right person for this. The department needs you more than ever. And the community, they're looking to you, Marcus. They're watching." Marcus nodded, but he couldn't shake the feeling of doubt gnawing at him. What if this wasn't enough? What if the city was too divided to see past the scandal? What if he wasn't the leader they needed? "You don't have to do this alone," Elaine added, sensing his unease. "You have people who are with you. And this city? They need a leader. They need you to show them the way." Marcus took a deep breath, leaning back in his chair. "Thanks, Elaine. I just hope I'm up to the task." "You will be," she replied firmly. "You've been up to the task since day one. Now, it's just time to prove it to everyone else." The press conference was held at City Hall, and the room was packed with reporters, photographers, and local dignitaries. The air felt thick with anticipation. The public had been waiting for answers, and now it was time to deliver them. Marcus stood behind the podium, his hands gripping the sides for support as the lights flashed and the cameras clicked. He was dressed in his uniform, the dark blue fabric sharp and crisp, though it did little to calm his nerves. His heart pounded in his chest, and he had to remind himself to breathe slowly as he glanced out at the sea of faces staring back at him. Some were familiar, others were strangers, but all of them were expecting something. An explanation, a solution, something to believe in. The mayor stood beside him, her gaze steady and unwavering, offering her support without speaking a word. She had already made her statement to the press earlier, but now it was Marcus's turn. He cleared his throat, the microphone amplifying the sound of his voice as he began. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here today. I know that many of you are here because of the incident involving Officer Richard Shaw and myself. I want to start by acknowledging that what happened was unacceptable. There is no place for hate, disrespect, or racism in the Crestview Police Department. That kind of behavior will not be tolerated, and we will take every step necessary to ensure that it is not repeated. There was a brief moment of silence, as if the room was holding its collective breath. Marcus could feel the eyes on him, some skeptical, some supportive. He continued. As the new police chief, it is my responsibility to lead this department with integrity and transparency. But it's also my responsibility to acknowledge the hard truths that we've been avoiding for too long. The police force is an institution that must serve and protect everyone in this city, and that begins with holding ourselves accountable. He paused, scanning the room, before leaning forward slightly. I have dedicated my life to law enforcement. I understand the complexities, the challenges, and the demands of this work, but I also understand that true change takes time, and it starts with the first step. Today, I am announcing that we will be implementing new reforms within this department, focusing on de-escalation training, anti-bias education, and building stronger relationships with our community. Marcus took a deep breath before delivering the closing remarks. This department will be one of integrity, respect, and accountability. It won't happen overnight, but it will happen. We owe it to the people of Crestview to do better. I will lead with fairness, and I will lead with honor. As he finished speaking, Marcus met the eyes of the reporters in the front row, his gaze firm, but not unyielding. The room was quiet for a moment, the air thick with expectation. Finally, a reporter spoke up, breaking the silence. Chief Thompson, how do you plan to handle the officers who are still loyal to Shaw? Marcus's jaw tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. We'll be having a meeting with all department staff in the coming days. Those who cannot align with our values will no longer be part of this department. This is about integrity. This is about respect. The questions continued, but Marcus knew that, at least for now, he had made his point. The press conference had gone as well as it could, but it was only the beginning. The real work, the hard work, would come in the weeks and months to follow. As he stepped off the podium, he felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to back down. Not now, not ever. A reckoning. The weight of Marcus's words at the press conference seemed to hang in the air for days after. His speech was met with a mix of praise and skepticism. While many applauded his commitment to reform, others, particularly those within the police department, were less than convinced. Old habits die hard, and the skepticism wasn't limited to the public. It was alive and well within the ranks of the force. Back at the police station, Marcus had to deal with the fallout directly. The officers had gone quiet in the days that followed. Some avoided him entirely, while others engaged in hushed conversations behind closed doors. Even the most seasoned members of the department, those who had seen countless changes come and go, were unsure of what to make of the new chief. Marcus knew that silence was more dangerous than outright rebellion. At least rebellion was honest. Silence was the breeding ground for resentment. That morning, as he walked down the hallway toward the briefing room, he could feel the weight of the station's atmosphere pressing on him. It wasn't just the whispers anymore. It was the eyes that followed his every step, the looks exchanged when he entered a room, the way the younger officers hesitated before greeting him. The officers had been waiting for him to fail, to prove that a black man couldn't lead a police department, especially one as entrenched in old ways as Crestview. For some, it wasn't just about Marcus's race, it was about the idea of change itself. The notion that they might have to leave their comfort zones, adapt, or even admit they were part of a broken system, was something they couldn't fathom. As Marcus entered the briefing room, he was met by Captain Elaine Carter, who was standing near the whiteboard, ready to start the morning meeting. She gave him a small, reassuring nod, but even she couldn't hide the wariness in her eyes. "Morning, Chief," she said, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "Ready for this?" "I don't think I have a choice," Marcus replied, forcing a thin smile. Elaine smiled back, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Fair point." The room filled quickly with officers, some fresh-faced and eager, others grizzled veterans with years of experience behind them. There was an unspoken tension as everyone took their seats. It wasn't just the usual morning briefing. This was different. This was a reckoning. Marcus walked to the front of the room, standing tall. He scanned the faces of his officers, some of whom he had known for years. He wasn't sure who would have their loyalty, but he was certain of one thing. This meeting would be pivotal in setting the tone for his leadership. "All right, everyone," Marcus began, his voice steady. "I know things have been tense since the press conference. Some of you may be wondering what direction I'm planning on taking the department, and where we go from here. Let me be clear. I'm not here to please anyone. I'm here to do what's right." A murmur rippled through the room. He could feel the eyes of the officers narrowing on him. They weren't sure what to make of him yet. He was new to the job, but he wasn't just a new face. He was a symbol. And symbols had power. Power that could either galvanize a team or tear it apart. "I'm aware that many of you are skeptical," Marcus continued. "And I get it. Change isn't easy, especially in a place like this. But you need to understand this. Our job isn't just about enforcing the law. It's about protecting people, all people, regardless of color, background, or history. If you're not ready to do that, then you're not fit for this department. Period." A few officers shifted in their seats, and Marcus noticed the tension increase. His gaze landed on Officer Greg Sullivan, a longtime member of the force who had always been vocal about his belief in traditional methods. Sullivan had been with the department for over 20 years and had a reputation for handling his way of policing with an iron fist. Sullivan leaned forward, his arms crossed. His face was set in a hard scowl. "And what about Shaw, Chief?" Sullivan's voice cut through the room. "You're talking about integrity and respect, but Shaw was one of your own. How do you explain letting him spit on you like that? You didn't even arrest him." The room fell silent. Marcus could feel the heat of everyone's gaze on him, waiting for his response. This wasn't just about Shaw anymore. It was about Marcus's authority as chief, about how much power he truly wielded in this department. "I didn't arrest Shaw," Marcus said slowly, "because this wasn't just about a violation of the law. It was about something deeper. I needed him to see the consequences of his actions in a way that could start a conversation, not just an arrest. Shaw wasn't just a rogue officer. He's a symptom of a larger problem that I'm here to fix." Sullivan scoffed, but Marcus pressed on, his voice growing firmer. "I didn't arrest Shaw because I want to make sure we don't sweep things under the rug. This department is riddled with toxic attitudes. If we continue to let those attitudes fester, we're just as guilty as Shaw." The room was still. Marcus held Sullivan's gaze for a moment, his eyes unflinching. It was a stare down, a challenge. Sullivan was one of the old guard, and Marcus knew it would take more than words to convince him. But this was his chance to show everyone, including Sullivan, that he wasn't here to be intimidated. "You all have a choice," Marcus said, his voice soft but resolute. "Either you change with me, or you leave. I won't stand by and watch the department that I lead fail because of old ways that no longer serve us. I'm asking you all to be better. If you can't do that, then you're not a part of this department anymore." The room was still, the silence heavy. The tension was palpable, but Marcus didn't break his stare. Finally, it was Officer Jessica Ramirez, one of the younger officers in the department, who spoke up. "I'm with you, Chief," she said, her voice steady but filled with conviction. "We need change. This department needs change." The room remained silent for a beat, but then a few others spoke up, one by one. Officer Martin Hayes, another younger officer, nodded his agreement, as did Lena Turner, a longtime detective who had always kept a low profile, but had a reputation for fairness. Marcus felt a surge of hope as others started to voice their support. This wasn't going to be easy, but it was starting to feel like he had a base, a foundation to work from. Sullivan, however, remained silent. His jaw clenched as he turned his gaze away from Marcus, his arms still crossed tightly. Marcus didn't take his eyes off Sullivan. You have a choice too, Greg, he said quietly. You can either help us change, or you can stay stuck in the past. But I won't be your punching bag. Sullivan's gaze hardened, but he said nothing. Marcus didn't expect him to. Not yet. As the meeting continued, Marcus could feel the dynamic shift slightly. There was still an underlying tension in the room, but it wasn't as thick as before. Some officers were more engaged, asking questions about the new policies he was proposing, about training reforms, about community outreach. There was a willingness to listen, even if it was laced with skepticism. But as the meeting concluded and the officers filed out of the room, Marcus was left standing there, his thoughts a tangled mess. This was just the beginning. The department had shown signs of cracking open, but cracks weren't enough to create change. Change would take time. It would take commitment. And Marcus was more determined than ever to see it through, no matter how hard it would get. His leadership would be tested in ways he could never have anticipated. But one thing was certain. He would not back down. Not now. Not ever. Fractures beneath the surface. The next few weeks felt like an endless storm of meetings, reports, and strategy sessions. Marcus had expected the pushback, but the sheer weight of it was more than he had anticipated. It wasn't just Shaw's incident that had put the department on edge. It was the fear of what Marcus's appointment as chief really meant. For some, it was a threat to the old guard. For others, it was a symbol of change they weren't sure they were ready for. Every morning, Marcus entered the station with a quiet resolve, but the pressure was beginning to take its toll. His meetings with the community leaders were going well. There was support, even optimism, in the neighborhoods he had worked hard to build relationships with. But inside the department, the cracks were starting to show. He could feel them beneath the surface, the subtle glances exchanged in the halls, the officers who couldn't look him in the eye, and the hushed conversations that stopped when he entered the room. It was especially tense during roll call. The shift had just started when Marcus walked into the briefing room, the usual hum of chatter quieting as he approached the front. He was now a familiar presence at these meetings, but the discomfort was still there. The department had tried to adjust, but change, like a muscle, could only stretch so far before it pulled too tight. As he walked to the podium, he noted the absence of some familiar faces. Officer Greg Sullivan was missing, as was Detective Rachel Cole, a quiet but staunchly traditional officer who had always kept her opinions to herself. The gap left by their absence didn't escape Marcus. He had a sense that the division was beginning to form, those who would bend and those who would break. "Morning, everyone," Marcus said, his voice steady, scanning the room. "I hope you've all had time to think about what we discussed last week. I've met with the city council. I've met with community leaders. The public is watching us. They're waiting to see what kind of department we'll become. And we're at a crossroads. I need each and every one of you to decide what side of history you want to be on." A few officers shifted in their seats, but there was no immediate response. Marcus had learned not to expect applause. This was not a popularity contest. It was about building trust, and trust, as he had learned, wasn't given. It was earned, inch by inch. "The reforms are moving forward," Marcus continued. "We've already rolled out the first round of training on de-escalation tactics, and anti-bias education will start next week. We're also revising how we handle complaints against officers. Transparency isn't just a buzzword, it's a practice. We're opening up the process to include oversight from outside groups." A few murmurs rippled through the room, but Marcus kept going. He was used to the tension, the way people resisted change without fully understanding it. The harder the push, the more reluctant some officers became. But the deeper the silence, the more determined he grew. "We're not perfect," he admitted. "We'll make mistakes. But we can't keep making the same mistakes. We can't keep pretending that nothing's wrong, that we don't need to change. We can't let the actions of a few define the reputation of the whole department. Shaw's actions were reprehensible, but they're not the only problem we face. We've all been part of a system that's been broken for years. It's time to fix it." When Marcus finished, there was a long pause. A few officers exchanged looks, but no one spoke. Then, just as Marcus was about to call for the end of the briefing, Officer Jessica Ramirez raised her hand. "I want to say something, Chief," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I've been with this department for 3 years now, and I've seen things that I can't unsee. There are good officers here, but there are also bad ones. We can't keep turning a blind eye to the problems inside our walls. I'm with you on this." Jessica's words hung in the room like a challenge, and it was clear that many of the officers were uncomfortable with the implied rebuke. She wasn't calling anyone out directly, but the message was obvious. Things needed to change. Marcus nodded in her direction. "Thank you, Jessica. It takes courage to speak up." But just as the mood in the room began to shift toward something more positive, the door swung open, and Detective Rachel Cole walked in. Her eyes narrowed, and her face set in a firm expression. She didn't say anything, but the air around her felt heavy. Rachel had always been one of the quieter officers, but today, she looked different, tense, almost defiant. "Detective Cole, everything all right?" Marcus asked, his tone neutral but curious. Rachel didn't respond right away. Instead, she walked to the front of the room and stood beside Marcus, her arms folded tightly across her chest. Her voice was sharp when she finally spoke. "Listen, Chief," she said, her words laced with frustration. "I've been around here long enough to see what happens when someone in your position gets too idealistic. You've been talking a lot about reform, but let's face it. We've been doing this job the same way for decades. This is how things work around here. We've kept the peace. We've kept the city under control." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "And what exactly is your point, Detective?" Rachel's gaze was unwavering. "My point is, this isn't going to work. You think you can change a system that's been in place for so long? You can't. You'll lose the support of the department. You'll lose the support of the people who keep this city safe. I'm trying to make sure we can keep this city safe and do it the right way," Marcus replied, his voice calm but firm. "The way that respects everyone, not just the people who happen to look like us." The tension in the room spiked. The officers around them shifted, some visibly uncomfortable with the confrontation. Others were intrigued, watching Marcus's every move. Rachel didn't back down. Respecting people is one thing, but what happens when those people don't respect us? When they resist arrest or put us in danger? Are you telling me we should just let them get away with it? Marcus stepped forward, his voice steady but resolute. "What I'm telling you, Detective, is that we can't keep responding to everything with force. We have to de-escalate. We have to give people the benefit of the doubt. Our job isn't just to arrest, it's to protect. And right now, too many of us are focused on punishing people rather than serving them." Rachel's eyes flashed with anger, but she said nothing else. She simply turned on her heel and walked out of the room, her footsteps echoing in the silence she left behind. As the door slammed shut, Marcus exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the moment. He knew that Rachel's departure wasn't just about one disagreement. It was a sign of something deeper. Something that wasn't going to be solved in one meeting, or even 1 year. "I know it's not easy, Chief," Jessica said, her voice softer now. "But you're doing the right thing. Keep pushing." Marcus nodded, though doubt crept into his mind. The fractures within the department were no longer invisible. They were becoming more apparent every day. It wasn't just about Officer Shaw. It was about an entire institution that had lived in denial for far too long. But the reality was starting to sink in. Not everyone would come along for the ride. And some of the officers who were loyal to the old ways? They might resist him until the very end. Later that evening, as Marcus sat in his office, the phone rang. It was Captain Elaine Carter, her voice low and urgent. "Marcus, you need to know something. Rachel. She's talking to some of the older officers, the ones who still feel like you're pushing too hard. She's rallying them. This isn't over." Marcus's heart sank. "I figured as much." "I know this isn't easy," Elaine said, "but don't back down. Not now. You've got too much momentum, too much support to let this stop you." Marcus clenched his fists, feeling a firelight within him. He had known that this fight would be long and grueling, but now it felt more personal. The department wasn't just divided, it was on the verge of splitting. But the question that haunted him was whether he could hold the line, Would the department fracture beyond repair? And if it did, would he have the strength to rebuild it? The breaking point. The following weeks were marked by a deepening tension that seemed to permeate every corner of the department. Marcus couldn't escape the feeling that his every move was under scrutiny. Not just by the community, but by his own officers. Some wanted change, some resisted it, and others simply didn't know which side they were on. Despite the quiet rebellion that simmered beneath the surface, Marcus tried to push forward with his reforms. The de-escalation training was still underway, and the anti-bias courses were slowly beginning to make an impact, though it was clear that the results would take time. The press was on his side for now, but the more he tried to reshape the department, the more cracks appeared in the facade of unity he had hoped to build. At home, Marcus was exhausted. Every day felt like a battle. His wife, Tasha, had noticed the toll it was taking on him. She tried to be supportive, but she also saw the weight he was carrying. It wasn't just the pressure of being the first black police chief in Crestview. It was the weight of being the person who had to fix a system that, for all its flaws, many still believed was fine as it was. One evening, as Marcus sat at the kitchen table, rubbing his temples after yet another long day of meetings and strategy sessions, Tasha spoke up, breaking the silence. "Marcus, you're burning yourself out. You can't keep going like this. You're making yourself sick with all this stress." Marcus sighed deeply. He had heard those words before, but it felt different now. The stress was no longer just about the weight of the job. It was about the future. He had to make this work. He couldn't afford to fail. "I know, Tasha, but this is bigger than me. It's bigger than just fixing a department. It's about changing the culture, changing the way we serve people. I can't walk away from that," he said, his voice heavy. "I get it," she replied, sitting down beside him and placing her hand over his. "But you're not going to be able to fix everything if you don't take care of yourself. You can't lead people if you're falling apart." Marcus didn't respond right away. Tasha's words had truth to them, but he couldn't shake the sense of urgency that had taken over his life. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that everything was reaching a boiling point. He had to act, and fast. The next morning, Marcus was at the station before sunrise. He had an early meeting scheduled with Officer Greg Sullivan and Detective Rachel Cole, both of whom had been increasingly vocal in their opposition to his reforms. Marcus knew that it was now or never. He needed to either bring them into the fold, or risk losing control of his department entirely. As he walked into the meeting room, he found Sullivan and Cole already there, sitting across from each other, their expressions grim. Neither offered a greeting. It was clear they both saw this meeting as a necessary confrontation. But neither one seemed willing to make the first move. Marcus sat down at the head of the table, his posture straight, his eyes hardening with resolve. He had come prepared for a fight. "I'm not going to waste anyone's time," Marcus said, cutting straight to the point. "You both know why I called this meeting. Things can't continue like this. Either we work together to make this department better, or we'll be at odds until this department breaks apart." Rachel's lips tightened into a thin line. "With all due respect, Chief, your idea of better isn't shared by everyone. You're pushing a vision that's not realistic. You're trying to change a system that's been in place for decades, and that's not going to work." "You're right," Marcus replied coolly. "The system needs to change, but change isn't optional anymore. The old ways are falling apart, and if we don't fix this, the city is going to lose faith in us. The community is already questioning everything we do. We have to show them we can do better." Sullivan scoffed, leaning back in his chair. "And you think that by overhauling everything, by making us weaker, we're going to gain their trust? You'll only make it worse. The criminals will know they can walk all over us." Marcus's jaw clenched. He could feel his patience slipping. "I'm not making us weaker. I'm making us smarter. I'm making us more effective. But I'm also making us human again. We can't keep responding with force at every turn. We need to build trust, not fear." Rachel leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "And you think we'll just change overnight? You think the officers here are just going to fall in line because you say so? This isn't a trust-building exercise, Marcus. This is reality. You're walking a tightrope, and if you're not careful, you're going to fall." You're right, Marcus said quietly. I am walking a tightrope. But if we keep pretending nothing's wrong, we're all going to fall together. The department is fractured, Rachel. Every day that we ignore it, it gets worse. We either fix it now, or we let it spiral into something unrecognizable. There was a long pause. Neither Rachel nor Sullivan spoke. Marcus could feel the weight of their silence, and for a brief moment, he wondered if he had lost them for good. Finally, Sullivan broke the silence. So, what do you want from us, Chief? You want us to just go along with your plan? To pretend like we're all on the same page? Marcus took a breath, knowing this was the moment of truth. I don't expect anyone to just go along with it, but I do expect everyone to be part of the solution. You both have experience. You both have influence in this department. I need you to help guide this change, not resist it. I need you to show the others that it's possible to evolve, to grow, to do this the right way. Rachel stared at him for a moment, her eyes hard, before finally speaking. And if we can't get behind it, what happens then? Marcus didn't flinch. Then I'll have no choice but to make hard decisions. This isn't personal. It's about the future of this department. It's about whether we want to be a force for good or a relic of the past. The room went quiet again. This time, however, Marcus didn't feel as though he had lost them. The silence wasn't one of rejection. It was one of contemplation, and that, in itself, was progress. Rachel stood up first, her hands still folded across her chest. I'll give it a shot, she said, her tone clipped. But don't expect miracles, Marcus. We'll see how this goes. Sullivan didn't respond immediately, but after a long pause, he stood as well. I'm not promising anything, he said, his voice still laced with skepticism. But I'll follow your lead, for now. Marcus didn't let himself breathe a sigh of relief. Not yet. The battle was far from over. But this was a small victory, one that meant there was a chance, just a chance, that the department might start to pull itself together. As the meeting ended, Marcus walked back to his office, the weight of his decisions still heavy on his shoulders. He knew that his leadership would continue to be tested. But in that moment, he had made a choice. He wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. The department was fractured, yes, but the only way to rebuild it was by confronting the fracture head-on, by forcing the truth to the surface. And now, for the first time in a long while, Marcus felt the stirrings of hope. Maybe they weren't beyond saving after all. The cracks widen. The shift in the department was subtle at first. Marcus had spent years working in law enforcement, and he knew how long it could take to enact real change, especially in a place as entrenched in tradition as Crestview. Still, the undercurrent of tension that had defined the past weeks seemed to be slowly shifting towards something more toxic. While there were a handful of officers who had begun to embrace the new direction, others were not just resisting. They were actively undermining Marcus's efforts. The following Monday, Marcus arrived at the station early to review the new training reports that had come in. De-escalation tactics were beginning to be integrated, but as he read through the evaluations, one thing stood out. The officers who had participated in the new curriculum were generally in favor of it, but the veteran officers, particularly those who had been around longer than Marcus, were far more resistant. The feedback ranged from indifferent to hostile, but the real turning point came that morning. Marcus had just finished a briefing when he received a call from Captain Elaine Carter. Her voice was tight, barely controlled. Chief, we've got a situation. Shaw's back on the streets. His lawyer filed a motion, and they've managed to get him reinstated, at least temporarily. Marcus's stomach twisted. Shaw, the officer who had spit on him in front of the press, the officer who had become a symbol of everything wrong with the department, was back. This was the worst-case scenario. Shaw had been on administrative leave, pending an investigation, but now it seemed the legal system had intervened. Shaw was allowed to return to his duties, at least for now. Where is he now? Marcus asked, his voice calm but sharp. Last I heard he was reporting for duty, though I haven't been able to confirm which precinct he's been assigned to, Elaine replied. But you know as well as I do that this is going to cause problems. Marcus felt his blood run cold. Shaw's return was more than just a legal issue. It was a direct challenge to everything Marcus was trying to build. Shaw had become a symbol of rebellion for the old guard in the department, the officers who believed that Marcus's reforms were a threat to their authority. His return would embolden them, give them the validation they were looking for. "I'll handle it," Marcus said, hanging up the phone with a finality that surprised even him. He knew this would be the defining moment of his leadership, whether he could take control and demonstrate that no one was above the changes he had promised, or whether he would let Shaw's return set the department back to square one. At the precinct, Marcus didn't waste any time. He found Officer Greg Sullivan almost immediately, sitting at his desk with a cup of coffee in hand. Sullivan didn't look up as Marcus approached, but the tension in the air was palpable. "Where is Shaw?" Marcus asked, his voice quiet but commanding. Sullivan's response was slow, almost calculated. "He's in the break room, Chief. I'd be careful if I were you. He's got a lot of people backing him around here." Marcus didn't flinch. He knew exactly what Sullivan meant. Shaw had become a rallying point for the officers who refused to accept Marcus's leadership. And now, with Shaw back in uniform, it felt like the resistance had grown stronger, more emboldened. He had no illusions that this would be an easy conversation. As he walked toward the break room, Marcus felt the weight of the entire department pressing down on him. This was it. If he didn't take a stand now, everything he had worked for could unravel. The break room door swung open, and there he was. Officer Shaw, sitting at a table, dressed in his uniform like nothing had happened. His eyes locked onto Marcus's as the door clicked shut behind him. Shaw's smirk was almost too confident, too self-assured. "Well, well, if it isn't the new reformer himself," Shaw said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "What's the matter, Chief? Feeling the pressure yet?" Marcus stood still, his gaze unwavering. "I don't have time for games, Shaw. You're supposed to be on leave, pending investigation. What the hell are you doing here?" Shaw leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed over his chest. "The lawyers cleared me. That's the law, Chief. You may be in charge now, but you don't get to ignore the law just because you don't like it. I've got every right to be here, and frankly, I'm doing my job better than most of these guys." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "You've got no business being here. You spit on me in front of the press. That's not something you can just walk away from. That's not something anyone can just forget." Shaw's grin only widened. "Yeah, I remember. But you didn't do anything about it. You didn't arrest me. You didn't do a damn thing except stand there and take it. Maybe that's why you're in over your head." Marcus fought to keep his emotions in check. This was the moment when everything could either change or fall apart. He needed to show Shaw and everyone else that things were different now. He needed to take control, not just of the situation, but of the department's future. "You're right," Marcus said, his voice steady but fierce. "I didn't arrest you, but I'm not afraid of you, Shaw. And I'm not afraid of what you represent. This department isn't a playground for people like you to do whatever you want without consequences. You're a symbol of everything that's wrong with this place, and I'm not going to let that stand anymore." Shaw stood up slowly, his smirk disappearing. He leaned across the table, his face just inches from Marcus's. "You think you're better than me? You think you can just erase what's been done? You're nothing but a paper tiger, Chief. All this talk about reform and change, and when push comes to shove, what will you do? Nothing. You'll cave." The words hit Marcus like a punch, but he didn't react. He was ready for this. "I won't cave," Marcus said firmly. "You want to test me? Fine. But know this. You're not above the law, and you're not above the changes that need to happen. If you think you can just go back to doing things your way, you're wrong. I'm in charge here now, Shaw, and you'll follow the rules like everyone else." Shaw's eyes flashed with anger, but Marcus didn't flinch. He stood his ground, unwavering, even as the room seemed to close in around him. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. After what felt like an eternity, Shaw finally broke the silence, his voice low. "You're going to regret this, Chief. Mark my words." With that, Shaw turned and walked out of the room, his boots heavy against the floor. Marcus stood there for a long moment, the adrenaline coursing through him. He knew that Shaw's return was a direct challenge to his authority and to the changes he was trying to implement. But what he didn't expect was how much it would divide the department. By the time Marcus left the station that evening, he was mentally and emotionally drained. The battle with Shaw was far from over, but it was only a small part of a much larger war. As he climbed into his car and drove home, he knew that the fractures in the department were widening. Shaw's return had lit a fire under the officers who had been quietly resisting, and now the real challenge was clear. He wasn't just trying to rebuild a broken system. He was fighting for the soul of the department itself, and the question now was, could he hold it together long enough to make it work? The quiet before the storm. The days following Shaw's return were quieter than Marcus had expected. But in the silence, there was a palpable tension that hung in the air like a storm cloud on the horizon. It was as though the department was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. The usual rhythm of the station, once filled with the hum of activity, had become unnervingly subdued. Officers walked with their heads down, avoiding eye contact, and the locker rooms were eerily quiet. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing beneath the surface. The calm was only temporary, and when the storm came, he would have to be ready. The following week, Marcus received a disturbing call from Detective Rachel Cole. Her voice, usually steady, was laced with concern. "Chief, I need to talk to you." "It's about Shaw," she began, her words hurried, clipped. "We've been getting reports from some of the younger officers. They're saying Shaw's been making rounds, talking to them, encouraging them to remember what this department used to be. He's spreading his influence like a cancer." Marcus rubbed his temples, trying to stave off the growing headache. "What exactly is he saying?" "He's telling them that your reforms are weak. He's telling them that the department has lost its edge, that you're making them soft. And he's using the old guard, the officers who've been here for years, to back him up. It's like a power grab. He's playing it smart, Chief. He's getting to the ones who feel like they're being left behind by all this change." Rachel's words were a cold splash of reality. Marcus had expected resistance, but Shaw wasn't just being a disruptive force. He was building a faction. And the officers who still thought the old ways worked, who still thought fear was the best tool for control, were listening. Some even welcomed it. Marcus's mind raced. This wasn't just about Shaw anymore. It was about an ideological split within the department. Those who embraced the future, and those who clung to the past. The question was, how long could this fragile peace hold before it shattered? "I'll take care of it," Marcus said finally, his voice tight with resolve. That afternoon, Marcus gathered his most trusted officers, Captain Elaine Carter, Detective Rachel Cole, and Officer Jessica Ramirez, to strategize. If Shaw was actively sowing discord within the department, it was time to confront it head-on. As they sat in the briefing room, Marcus looked around the table at the faces of those who had supported him from the beginning. They were the ones who had bought into his vision of change, who had dared to believe that the department could evolve into something better. But now, he could see the doubt creeping into their eyes. The battle was becoming more personal than ever. "Shaw's spreading lies," Marcus said, pacing back and forth. "He's telling the department that my vision isn't working, that we're becoming weak. We've got officers choosing sides, and I can't let that happen." Elaine spoke first. "The old guard is digging in their heels, Chief. Shaw is their rallying point. He's not just talking to the young officers. He's targeting the ones in the middle too, the ones who are uncertain about all the changes. He's exploiting their fears." Rachel nodded. "He knows how to push buttons. He's using the fear of uncertainty to rally support. But we're not just fighting Shaw anymore. We're fighting the culture he represents. If we don't shut this down soon, it'll get out of control." Marcus exhaled slowly, his gaze heavy. He knew this was only the beginning. The longer Shaw had the freedom to speak unchecked, the more damage he could do. Marcus had to act fast, but carefully. He couldn't afford to alienate the officers who had chosen to stay loyal to him, especially if they weren't fully ready to confront the hard truths of their profession. "I'm not going to take the easy way out," Marcus said, his voice steady. "I won't silence Shaw, but I'll make it clear that the department isn't his to manipulate. I'll call him out publicly. I'll make sure every officer knows where I stand and what I stand for. Jessica spoke up, her voice quiet but resolute. What about the officers who are backing Shaw? The ones who aren't directly involved but are still listening. We need to remind them of why they signed up in the first place. This isn't about blind obedience, it's about accountability. If we let Shaw tear us apart, we're no better than the system we're trying to change. Marcus looked around the room, his gaze stopping on each officer. Elaine, Rachel, Jessica. They had all been through battles with him already, and now they were the ones he had to rely on to keep the department together. But Marcus knew that the real work was going to be outside the meeting room. He needed to get to the heart of the matter, and he needed to do it soon. All right, he said after a long pause. We'll begin by addressing the department as a whole. I'll hold a town hall meeting, make it clear that there's no place for divisiveness. Then, I'll have a sit-down with Shaw. He needs to know that this isn't just about me anymore. It's about the future of this entire department. Rachel leaned forward. I'll make sure we have backup. If Shaw resists this, we need to be ready to cut him off, legally, if necessary. I'm with you, Jessica said, her voice unwavering. If it comes down to it, I'll support whatever needs to happen to keep this department from falling apart. Marcus felt the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. The reality was setting in. He was on the edge of something dangerous. If he didn't act decisively, everything he had worked for could collapse. Shaw's return had turned into a powder keg, and all it would take was one wrong move to set it off. The town hall meeting was scheduled for that evening, and Marcus had prepared himself for a tough crowd. The officers were split, and it was time for them to choose. Would they stand with the future of the department, or would they cling to the past? As he walked into the meeting room, he saw the faces of officers he had worked alongside for years. Some nodded in acknowledgement, but many were distant, guarded. Shaw's influence was evident in the way they held themselves, the way they leaned back in their chairs, arms crossed, waiting for Marcus to make his move. Marcus stepped up to the microphone, the room falling into a quiet hush. His eyes scanned the room, lingering on the faces that seemed most resistant. Shaw wasn't there. Marcus hadn't expected him to be. Shaw was too proud to show up for something like this. But his absence only made Marcus's presence feel more significant. This department is at a crossroads, Marcus began, his voice steady, each word deliberate. There are two paths we can take. We can continue down the road of division and fear, where we let the actions of a few control the fate of us all. Or we can stand together, united, in our commitment to serve and protect every person in this city. With integrity, honor, and respect. The choice is ours. He paused, letting his words sink in. I've heard the complaints. I've heard the doubts. But let me be clear. This department is changing. We are evolving. We are becoming better, smarter, more accountable, and more in tune with the community we serve. And that starts with you. Marcus's eyes swept over the room again, each officer's gaze meeting his, some uncertain, some defiant, but all listening. I will not tolerate anyone who stands in the way of that progress. If you want to be part of the solution, then step up. If you want to be part of the problem, you'll be dealt with accordingly. As the room remained silent, Marcus could feel the tension mounting. The storm was coming. The question was, who would survive it?